Hey everybody, today let's do an election flashback and revisit some of the more notable races. So for this, we're going to go back about 6 years. We're going to do 2018 and take a look at the Senate. We might do other ones in the future while there's some downtime between elections. But let's look here at 2018. That was a midterm year during the first Trump term, and overall it's considered a blue wave. Dems made a lot of gains in the House and with the governors, but one place they did not make any gains on actually was in the U.S. Senate. A net loss of seats here really complicates that narrative. Overall, we could see that Republicans came in here with a majority. They already had 51 seats. Dems were at 47, and after the dust settled, the GOP came out with 2 more seats. They went up to 53. That was crucial in getting more judges appointed during the final 2 years of that Trump term. Now, overall, Dems did win the popular vote here, but some of that is going to be skewed by the California numbers, where there were 2 Dems in the general election. And of course, we've got 2 independent senators who caucus with the Democrats. So let's go through these seats and see if there's anything notable. Now, there's bound to be some stuff that I just don't remember, but we'll start here in Arizona. And this was an open seat because Republican Jeff Flake decided to call it quits after only 1 term. And you might remember he was not exactly on Trump's good side, so he might have had some challenges in a primary as it is. But the Republicans did have an interesting primary here. The winner was Martha McSally. Now, she did end up serving in the Senate for a little bit, and she did run again after this election. But back here in 18, she did win that nomination with a clear majority of the vote. However, there were also 2 other candidates in that race. There was Kelly Ward and Joe Arpaio. You might remember Arpaio, the longtime sheriff of Maricopa County. A lot of controversy surrounding him. You might love him, you might hate him. He was well into his 80s at this point, and he still got almost 18%. Now, on the other side, Democrats were making a play for this seat. This state was no longer as red as it used to be, so they ended up with Kyrsten Sinema as their nominee against McSally in the general. It was a pretty close race, but Sinema actually flipped this seat and made it blue for the Dems. She won it by over 2 points, but this was an embarrassing loss for the Republicans. And of course, since then, they haven't been able to win a Senate seat here. Next, if we go to California, here we had longtime incumbent Dianne Feinstein running yet again. There were concerns about her age, etc., but she decided to do it one more time. Now, given California has a top 2 primary system, there's a ton of candidates in this race, and there ended up being 2 Democrats that advanced to the general. Kevin De Leon, or Kevin De Leon, however you want to say it. He squeaked in there with only 12% against Feinstein. Now, given Feinstein is the very long-time establishment candidate, I think that was enough for her to secure this final term. It was a little close, but Feinstein still won with 54%. Of course, in retrospect, that looks like a terrible decision for Feinstein to run for this term. Now, De Leon had his own scandal after this on the LA City Council, but Feinstein later died in office, and there was a lot of conversation about her mental decline. Next, in Connecticut, not much to say about this one. Chris Murphy secures another term, and it's another 20-point blowout in the Constitution state. Next, in Delaware, Tom Carper won his final term, but like Connecticut, no contest here in the general election. Next, in Florida, this was the closest Senate race. Democrats had well-established incumbent Bill Nelson running for a 4th term, but Governor Rick Scott decided to challenge him. And even though it was a blue-leaning environment, Florida started to cement itself in as a redder state, because once everything was over, Rick Scott actually defeated Bill Nelson, and Republicans had a pickup here in the Sunshine State. It was way under a quarter-point margin, only about 10,000 votes for Scott, but this was a surprise and a huge win here for the Republicans. That was a very exciting race, and I don't think I thought Scott was going to be able to pull it out in the end. I thought he was going to come up just short. But Scott is well known for his very narrow electoral wins. Next, in Hawaii, there's really nothing to say about this one. It's an extremely blue state. Republicans had a competitive primary, but it doesn't matter. Mazie Hirono easily won re-election. Next, let's go to Indiana. This was a great race. This had an incumbent Democrat, Joe Donnelly, running for re-election. Without Donnelly, it seemed like this would be an easy flip, but with Donnelly, they had a chance. Now, Republicans had a competitive primary. For a while, I thought it would be Todd Rokita as the nominee. Then they could have had 2 Todds as their U.S. senators, with Todd Young being the other one. But Mike Braun, who's now the governor of Indiana, he seemed to come out of nowhere. He didn't have a ton of political experience, but he ended up securing that nomination. Now, in the general, it was unclear who was going to be able to win. Braun seemed to run as more of an outsider, while Donnelly ran hard toward the center. In the end, the lead of the state was not enough for Donnelly. He went down by 6 points. So Republicans had another big pickup in the Hoosier state. If we go to the next next state, it's Maine, and this is independent Angus King. He technically faced a Democrat and a Republican, and he easily won re-election by almost 20 points. And this also did usher in the era of ranked choice voting in this state. Next, in Maryland, there's not a whole lot to say here. Ben Carter won his final term, and without someone like Larry Hogan on the ballot like we just got to see in 24, it ends up being a colossal landslide here for the Dems. It's almost a 35-point margin. Next, Massachusetts, another state with very minimal action. Elizabeth Warren won another term over Jeff Deal. Deal would go on to run for governor and be the nominee in 2022, but he took a pretty bad loss. But in this, he actually managed to win one county. How about in Michigan? Given Trump won this state in 2016, there was a chance Republicans could maybe put it in play. They did have a competitive primary between John James and Sandy Penciler. James won his first of 2 consecutive nominations, but in the general, Stabenow ended up winning her final term rather comfortably by about 6-7 points. Next, Minnesota. And this state had a regular and a special election, so they had 2. And the first one was a complete cakewalk for Amy Klobuchar. This looks like the margin it would be in Maryland. But they also had a special election, and this was because Al Franken resigned. So the Dems put up Lieutenant Governor Tina Smith, and given it's Minnesota, it was a pretty easy win for Smith as well. But it does go to show you that there can be a different margin, even in 2 concurrent Senate elections. 10.5 points here versus 24 for Klobuchar. Incumbency and the candidates can sometimes make all the difference. Next, Mississippi also had 2 elections. The first one here also was no contest. Roger Wicker easily wins another term. But then there was also a special election, and that margin, just like Minnesota, was much narrower. And for whatever reason, special elections here are technically nonpartisan, and it's also a blanket primary. So you had Cindy Hyde-Smith, the Republican, and Mike Espy, the Democrat, go on to a runoff. Now also in that first round, you have Chris McDaniel pulling in 16%. You might remember he also came extremely close to taking out Thad Cochran in a primary back in 2014. But anyway, in the general election, Hyde-Smith won, but she did not have the easiest path to winning that election. She got it done with over 7%. Next, let's go to Missouri. This is another one that was held by an incumbent Democrat, Claire McCaskill. Democrats put all their hopes on her to be able to hold that seat, but she faced Attorney General Josh Hawley, and the lean of the state was unable to save McCaskill. She went down by about a 6% margin, and the political realignment continued. Republicans made this seat in a red state red. Next, how about Montana? And here's the durable and impressive Jon Tester winning his final term. This seat was another ripe opportunity for the Republicans to get another flip after Matt Rosendale fought off the other competitors to become that nominee with only about 1/3 of the vote. He fell short of taking out Tester in the general by about 3.5 points. So an impressive hold here for the Dems, but if it wasn't for the national environment, it would seem like Tester could have easily gone down. The next state is Nebraska, and there was no Dan Osborne back in 2018 to challenge Deb Fischer. The Democrat here was not really memorable at all. Fischer went on to win by about 19 points. If we go on to Nevada, this had an incumbent Republican, Dean Heller, but he was challenged by one-term Congresswoman Jackie Rosen, and because it was a blue environment, Heller went down and Dems flipped and picked this seat up by about 5%. Next, in New Jersey, the scandal-plagued Bob Menendez won re-election to another term. Given those scandals, there was a potential outside chance it could be competitive for the Republicans. But with the lean of the state and that national environment, Bob Hugin could not even get it down to single digits against Menendez. Next, let's look at New Mexico. Here, there's really not a whole lot to say. After former Governor Gary Johnson stepped in as the Libertarian nominee, he pulled in an impressive 15%. The problem was the Republican got twice that, and the Democrat Martin Heinrich got 54% and won re-election. How about New York? Absolutely nothing to say about this one. Total blowout here for Gillibrand as she wins another term. In North Dakota, this was another red state that had a Democratic senator running for re-election. We've seen a few of those, but this time it was Heidi Heitkamp for the Dems. The Republicans this time put up U.S. Representative Kevin Cramer. In the general, it wasn't really close. Cramer flips the seat and he wins it by almost 11 points. So even with the blue leading environment, the polarization of a lot of these states kicks in these Senate races. However, in Ohio, we can see, like Jon Tester in Montana, Sherrod Brown won re-election to his final term. The state had been moving toward the right, but it wasn't as red as it is today. And Brown, being the incumbent, was able to take down weaker candidate Jim Renacci. He won that by about 7 37 points. And in Pennsylvania, we had another Democrat running for a third term. That was Bob Casey. We all know he went down in 24, which is kind of impressive considering back here in 18, he won re-election by about 13 points. In the Ocean State, Rhode Island, no excitement here whatsoever as Sheldon Whitehouse wins re-election. In Tennessee, there was a good matchup here. This was an open seat as incumbent Republican Bob Corker decided not to run again. So former Democratic governor who seemed to be popular, Phil Bredesen, decided to throw his hat into the ring. He faced U.S. Rep. Marsha Blackburn, and there was some thinking that maybe this one could actually be competitive. It seemed like that for a little while, but by the election, it looked like Blackburn was going to be able to win, and she did. She won by over 10 points. But one of the big nail-biters was the next state, that's Texas. This was Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke, and this was a big moment for the Democrats, hoping to capitalize on the blue trends of the state over the past decade, coupled with the national environment and the relatively unlikable candidate of Ted Cruz for the Republicans. Everything seemed to be lining up, and maybe they could potentially flip this seat, and that would send shockwaves through the political world. The only problem is it didn't actually happen. It was close, but Ted Cruz prevailed by over 2.5 points. So that would have been a fascinating story. However, we all know what happened 6 years later. Ted Cruz goes on to win by a very convincing margin for a third term. Next state, Utah. Here we had very long-time incumbent Orrin Hatch deciding to retire, so it was an open seat, and the Republicans had former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney as their nominee. He defeated Mike Kennedy, who is now serving in the U.S. House in that Republican primary. Given Romney's connection with the state and how red it is overall, there was no stopping Romney. He won by more than 30 points. If we go to Vermont, there's really no excitement here whatsoever unless you're into that Republican primary. It was a close one, and technically the winner of that primary ended up stepping aside, and Lawrence Zupon became the nominee. But nobody was going to take down Bernie Sanders. He went on to win by a gigantic 40 points. In Virginia, it was another very competitive Republican primary. Corey Stewart faced Tim Kaine in the general election, where that was not at all competitive. Kaine wins by 16 points. We've got Washington. It's another top 2 primary, and Maria Cantwell faced Susan Hutchison in the general election. It's a blue state. It's a well-known and popular incumbent. Cantwell wins by 17%. If we go to West Virginia, this one was definitely on the radar for the Republicans. It's one of the very reddest states out there, and conveniently, they had a Democrat Senator, Joe Manchin. He fought off a more progressive challenger in his primary, and Patrick Morrisey, who was just elected governor, he secured that nomination in a competitive primary for the GOP. In the general, it was a big battle, but good old Joe Manchin won re-election by over 3%. So another fascinating race. We've got a couple more of these. We've got Wisconsin. There was some thinking here that maybe this could be competitive again because Trump won it in 2016, but there was really nothing going on here. Tammy Baldwin won her second term by double digits. And finally, it's Wyoming. Total blowout here for John Barrasso. We're talking 37 points. And that's pretty much it. There's a lot there. There's definitely some intriguing results in different states. That was only 6 years ago, but so much has changed since. You can really see how the political polarization kicks in then and ever since. A lot of the losers are forgettable, but some of them did have political comebacks. And you never know, maybe some of them come back even again in the future. And there are probably some more details there in the primary or in the general that I just forgot about. But that was fun to go through and do a recap of all those Senate races from 2018. So let me know in the comments, are you surprised Republicans were able to come out with 2 more seats in that blue wave? And which of the races did you completely forget about? Which ones do you think were most exciting? Which candidates do you think dropped the ball? Let me know down below. On your way out, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join if you'd like to support the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.